more MMA DFS picks, lineup advice for FanDuel and DraftKings UFC 286. Everything you need to beat this card Saturday, March 18th. We're here live 10 a.m. Eastern because the slate starts at 1 p.m. Eastern. A crazy card, 15 fights. We got a lot to break down, so let's jump right into it. First of all, welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. I am joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com and writer at OccupyFantasy.com. Jake, it is a long week, I know for sure, and as you and I were talking right before we went live, it makes it tough when you only have a few more hours to build as the slate starts at 1.
Yeah, man. Really brutal when you have, 15 fights is the biggest cards we can ever have. And then on top of that, so we're working later on Friday. And then on top of that, the card starts at 1 opposed to 6. So we lose all of Saturday. So really burning it on both ends here. But, let's get this done. Everyone's got the same time to work with. So no different than the field.
Exactly right. If you're in the chat, say what's up. If you have questions throughout the show, we'll do our normal schedule here. But if you have questions, we'll interrupt and we'll answer those questions. What we normally do, if you are new here, we break down the main event. This time is the trilogy, Kamaru Usman, Leon Edwards. We talk about fighters that are making their UFC debut. Stylistically, what do they like? What are their chances like for DFS scoring in their debut? We play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup for fighters that have less than 4 fights under their belt in the UFC to get some context to their stats. And then we'll rapid fire fights you have to target, best prize picks plays. You see the promo code there on screen, as well as our favorite 2 bets for our stream parlay of the week. As Double J in the chat says, Occupy and coffee. Yes, very much so. And Jake, I assume coffee will transition to beer here pretty shortly for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing we get with a short start. Not much water time. We got to go straight from caffeine to alcohol.
Yeah, the best of days go from coffee straight to alcohol. So let's get into it. First of all, real quick, if you're not subscribed already, make sure you are to the channel. Get notified when we go live, upload these videos. But let's jump into it. So, Jake, first of all, like you mentioned, 15 fights on the card. It's going to be uncomfortable no matter what you do. You have to make some tough decisions. So what is your advice for people out there who are playing this slate thinking, man, there's so many big names, there's so many newcomers. The model has a lot of guys and girls ranked really highly. Your write-ups have a lot of fighters ranked highly. How do you really pare it down? How do you limit your player pool on such a large slate?
I mean, it's tricky, right? I think you definitely have to exclude some fighters here. I would say a minimum of 2, ideally, 4, get it down to like the equivalent of like a 13 fight card, basically. Because otherwise you're just spread so thin. I mean, you don't want, 10%, 10 to 15% of everyone because it's going to be hard to get the right combination. So you got to take a few stands. It's not going to be comfortable. Ideally, you take some stands where there's some leverage to be gained and you're not just, fading low-owned guys that, if they hit, you're going to win a bunch of money on those guys. Those aren't really the guys you want to fade. You want to fade some guys where when the field is heavy on them, you have a lot to gain when they bust. So I mean, I think you really got to take some uncomfortable stands here, and fade guys that most people will not want to fade.
And the other benefit to that is it may seem uncomfortable. Let's just say, for instance, you're fading Uzman, right? Like you read Jake's write-up, you like Leon Edwards, you're fading Uzman in this fight, right? We haven't projected for what, Jake, on DraftKings, 40-something% on 44%, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, 48%. He's the highest owned fighter on the slate. So I mean, yeah, that's the ultimate high risk fade. You fade Uzman, half the field busts if you're right. It's a pretty good start.
So here's what I'm saying. I'm not even necessarily saying that you have to fade Uzman or I'm recommending to fade Uzman, but the fact that there are 14 other favorites on the card and you need 3 to 4 of them to outscore Uzman, the fact that you get a couple extra fighters to have that chance makes it even more probable that a high-owned fighter gets left out of winning lineups. So that's just something you have to think about. It may be uncomfortable to fade a guy with a 40% inside the distance or 50% inside the distance, but you have to consider that on this slate. So now let's talk about that main event, Jake. Usman, Edwards. I think that obviously the common narrative is that Usman was winning the last fight pretty comfortably before getting knocked out late. You have a little bit of a different take. Break it down for me from a betting perspective and then what it means for DFS.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he was winning the fight until he got knocked out, but he also lost the first round. That Edwards seemed highly affected by the Salt Lake City altitude. Edwards seemed to gas out. I mean, Uzman obviously was affected by it too, but he trains at altitude, whereas, Edwards trains at sea level and came over 2 weeks, didn't have much time to acclimate. I think that played a really big factor in the fight. I think if you look at round one, just skill for skill, when both guys are fresh, I think, Edwards looked really good. He handed Uzman the first takedown of his career. He later on handed him the first knockout of his career. And in Uzman's prime, I think he wins this fight. But I mean, the guy's 35 years old. He's had bad knees for a while. He's had hand surgeries lately. He's been mentioning the idea of retiring sooner rather than later. I mean, it just seems like the wheels are starting to fall off. And if we look at, Usman's scoring, he used to go nuclear all of the time. And he was scoring, these ridiculous, insane scores like 195, 168, 130, 156. You look at his last four fights, 104, 104, 113, 98. I mean, the guy's trending down. And I get it. He was going to score, 130 points the last time they fought. But if you take away the altitude, I don't think that rounds 2 through 4 go exactly the way they did. And then you add in the London factor. I don't think Usman's going to be able to push Edwards against the cage for 4 minutes at a time without the ref breaking it up. I mean, the whole crowd's going to be screaming, booing at him. I think we're going to see quicker breakups. I think we're going to see a fresher Leon. I think that if you look at the trajectories of their careers, I think Leon's in his prime right now and getting better, and I think Usman's getting worse. So, I mean, I think we're going to see a much better Edwards and a worse Uzman from the last time they fought. But I don't think that's the way most people are going to play it. I think most people are going to play it under the assumption that this is prime Uzman. The guy was winning. He was up 3-1 in rounds going into that 5th round. And that's why he's going to be 50% owned. So, I mean, it seems like you have to be under. I'm not saying you go 0% Uzman because he can score really well. And he's not 9,500 at 8,900.
Right.
Yes, he can get outscored, but it's tougher, like it's going to be easier for guys like Makai at 9,700 to get priced out than Uzman at 8,900. So I think being under the field, I think you have to be under the field in tournaments, just based on everything considered. And then Leon, it's not like Leon ever really scores well. You look at the last win, he gets a 5th round knockout. He only scores 84 points, but he also got controlled for like 3 rounds. So he's probably going to score better than that in a win, most likely. I mean, he only scored like 91 against Nate Diaz, 99 against RDA. Both of those were 5-round decisions. But I think at his price tag, if he scores in the 90s, he's got a pretty good shot at getting in. But if we get a higher scoring slate, he could get left out. So it's not like the winner of this main event is definitely going to be in winning tournament lineups. I mean, historically, Edwards' fights have been a little bit lower scoring, lower volume, guys really technical. He took Uzman down once. I don't think he's going to have a ton of grappling success in this fight. So he's going to be really reliant on striking and getting another finish to score well. So I think, there's ways that either guy gets left out, Uzman getting priced out in the win, or Edwards just not scoring enough. And then there's also ways for them to get in. And then in low risk contests, I think you still stack it. I mean, it's not like the dream stack like last week with like Jan and Dvalishvili, but I think that, there's still a really good chance that it goes the distance. If we just look at the odds, negative 175 to go the distance. If we get 5 rounds out of each of these guys, I think they're going to combine for a pretty decent score here. So I think it still makes sense to stack it in low risk contest.
Good breakdown there, Jake. I appreciate that. And let's just say, if you were wrong about Edwards, what would be the reason why? Just so people get the other side of the coin here.
Yeah, I mean, Uzman obviously could just control him for the whole fight and put up a big wrestling score. I mean, that can definitely happen. I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm saying it's less likely to happen than last time.
Fair enough.
And it's less likely than the odds suggest. The odds suggest Uzman has a 68% chance to win. I think it's closer to a coin flip. I mean, Uzman could control him the whole fight, or he could not.
Fair enough. AO in the chat says, can we fade the main event? So for tournaments, obviously there's massive leverage if 70, 75% of the field is on it. So I think you broke it down already, Jake, but yes, we can fade this main event, right, in tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like Uzman can get priced out even in a win, and Edwards can fail to score enough if we get a slate where we get multiple underdogs scoring well. If we get another slate where only 2 dogs win and Edwards wins, then he's going to be in the winning lineup. So you got to kind of build accordingly.
For sure. Patrick says 0% Uzman or 100%. What would you be more willing to do?
Man. I mean, if those are the only 2 options, I think I'm going 0, but we talked about it earlier. That's a very uncomfortable complete fade.
It is, but no risk it, no biscuit for sure on these types of slates. So a couple comments in the chat, Jake, about Marvin Vettori, who I know both you and I are planning on playing 0% of, which is he's going to be less than 20% owned probably. But give us some reasons why. And I think people are looking at the game logs, or the fight logs, not realizing that most of those big scores were in 5-round decisions. Plus, Delize generally is pretty tough to score against.
Yeah, I mean, Delize is super tough to score against because he's, a low volume power puncher that also has grappling. And yeah, I mean, you look back at Vittori's, 3-round decision wins, and he's scoring like 82, 81, 65 points. So his box score is super misleading because he's been in so many 5-round wars where he's scoring 129, 156, 122. Those are all 5-round decisions. Now he's going to be in a low volume fight. Vittori's actually trained with Delize a little bit at King's MMA because Delize is boys with Giga. So these guys, that's always an interesting narrative when people have trained together because it means that maybe they know they have a better idea of how to attack the other person, at least the guy that was successful in training. So, I mean, that's one kind of interesting dynamic, but I don't think they've trained like a ton together. I think it was like the League like, visiting and brief training session.
Right.
But I mean, that means Vittori knows Delize, and he's probably like, yeah, this guy's super powerful, possibly on steroids, like good at, throwing up heel hooks. I need to be careful of this guy. So yeah, I think it's really hard for Vittori to return value here. I mean, the guy basically fights to decisions every single fight, other than that Carl Robertson submission, and it's going to be really hard to just dominate Delize on the mat or land a bunch of strikes. So I mean, personally, I think Vittori is the easiest fade on the slate.
And a submission against Robertson certainly does not count for anything. So.
Right.
All right, let's talk about these newcomers, Jake. It is 10:12. We're here until 10:30 on the dot. So let's get through these. Lots of newcomers on the card. Just to make your life easier, Jake, 15 fights. We have to have a bunch of newcomers on the card as well. So let's start from the earliest fight of the night to the latest fight, and we'll go through fighters making their debut. And we'll keep this pretty brief. What is their background, level of competition, type of fighter they are. So going all the way down, we have the 11th fight number 11, Christian Leroy Duncan.
Yeah, kind of a young guy, 27 years old, 7-0, 6 finishes, Cage Warriors champion. Guy's from England, so he'll have the home crowd behind him. Really just a pure striker, not a ton of volume, doesn't really grapple any. I got to give it to him. The guy knows how to win. He was fighting a grappler recently. The guy was wearing contacts. He's like, boom, eye poke. You can't see now. Contacts out. So I mean, the guy knows how to win. But I think his grappling is going to be a big issue in the UFC defensively, just because I think people are going to put him on his back, realize that he's kind of a one-dimensional power puncher. So you just got to get him there. That's the tough part. The guy likes throwing like crazy, like flying knees, spinning attacks and stuff. Powerful dude. So you got to be careful with him, but you put him on his back, and I think he gets pretty helpless at that point.
Yeah, if you're playing his opponent to Dorovich, it will certainly be a hold the breath moment for pretty much the entire fight. So, all right, moving on down, we have on short notice Gabriel Santos fighting Lerone Murphy.
Yeah, so another young guy, 26 years old, undefeated, 10-0, 7 finishes. This guy, he's the one short notice replacement on the slate, or I mean, really short notice. He only stepped in on a week's notice, which always a tough spot to make your debut on short notice, but especially when you're facing an undefeated veteran. It's a really tough spot for him, but the guy's super aggressive, Brazilian striker. He grapples. He's coming off a pair of knockout wins in the LFA. He looks a little chinny, though, man. He got dropped hard in November, a minute into his fight. Somehow survived just barely, and then came back to win early in round 2. But he looks like a guy that'll be good for DFS scores. He's just pushing forward, doesn't run away from action.
Things we love to see. All right, moving on down, we have against Makai, we have Jafel Filho, the biggest underdog on the card.
Yeah, this guy's 29, 14-2 with 13 finishes. Last 12 wins all came early. Coming off a lower volume 3rd round TKO on Contender Series. The guy looks big and powerful. I was laughing and telling you earlier in the week, go compare his Sherdog photo to his Tapology photo and tell me this guy didn't get on steroids at some point. It's quite the difference. But he's a big flyweight, man. I mean, he's strong. He can grapple. He looks for a lot of chokes, and he's shown he has power. I think 3 of his last 5 wins have come by TKO. But really tough spot, man. I mean, they're bringing him in here to lose. But I mean, I think the one hope with him is that Makai has this like kind of mysterious shoulder injury, like an AC sprain where maybe it was dislocated in training. But I think that's kind of your lottery ticket there, just hoping that Makayev's shoulder either is worse than people think or gets re-injured during the fight or something.
Let me ask you this, just as an aside. Have you been as impressed with Makayev as the hype coming into the UFC?
I don't know, man. I mean, he was a young guy. I knew he was going to have kind of bumps in the road. I know that the Gordon fight wasn't a great look for him. He faced some adversity in that fight. I mean, Gordon's a black belt. I mean, the guy was what, like a purple belt or something. I mean, he's not like. I mean, the guy's so young. He's like 22. It takes a
True.
while to get to that point in grappling. So he's gonna have to learn along the way. But I think he's gonna get better every fight. So the real question with him is like he could look terrible if he's hurt, and then everyone's like, "Oh, this guy's a fraud."
Yeah.
But I really think it just comes down to the injury, man. So I think he's looked good overall, and unsurprisingly, he's had struggles at times because of his age. But nah, I still think he's an interesting prospect. But I know a lot of people hate on him, but I really just think he's just a young guy. Like you gotta look at it in context.
Fair enough. Fortunately for us, UFC has fantastic injury reporting, so we should know every detail about Makayev's injury going into this fight. All right. Fight number 8 of the night. We have two newcomers facing off against each other. Talk to me about both of them, Jake. We have Sam Patterson and we have Yanel Ashmouz.
Yeah, both these guys are younger guys. Patterson's like a super tall, 6'3", 78-inch reach, English guy, mostly a striker, but has a nice guillotine. I think he's 5 submissions, 4 of them are by guillotine. He just loves to look for that submission. He's coming off a second round submission win on Contender Series. He looks kind of chinny, man. We've seen him get kind of wobbled and hurt on the feet before, and the guy's so tall that you wonder about the weight cut and everything with him, but he's really long, man. I mean, he's one of those types of guys that's like almost like Jalen Turner in terms of size, where it's
True.
just hard to close the distance on him. And I'm not calling him Jalen Turner, but in terms of body type, that's what he is. He trains at a smaller gym at Team CrossFace, and he's like, I'm not gonna train with any like UFC fighters or go to any big gyms or do any cross training. I want to prove that you can make it out of a smaller gym, which is like,
Bold
do you
strategy.
really want to risk your UFC? Yeah, really bold strategy. You want to risk your UFC career on proving a point about your English gym? So I mean, I don't know. I don't love that about him. So we'll see. We'll see. But good size, good submission skills, lots of finishes. I don't think he's lost a fight in his last 10. He's like 9-0-1. So I mean, he's had success, but we'll see if it translates to the UFC level.
And if you were watching his earlier fights, his pre UFC tape, pretty much every commentator in every single fight said the same thing. It's like, well, you can't simulate a guy like this in training, given his size in this division. So
Right.
I'm not sure if Ashmouz can simulate that, but give me some insight into Ashmouz's game.
Yeah, this guy is really bizarre. So he's 6-0 with 5 finishes. He fought half of his career like in 2017 at 170 pounds, disappears for 4 years. Allegedly, the same person comes back, much more jacked, completely different body type. I would say still kind of a wild striker, but his last fight, he finally looked for more takedowns and got a bunch of ground and pound. Really aggressive guy, just really stocky, powerful guy, but super green, pretty wild. I think they're bringing him on too early, man. Like a 6-0 guy that has only fought, 3 times in the last like 6 years, and he's been fighting a bunch of low-level competition. I feel like they just needed to fill a spot, but he's kind of one of these like if he lands the knockout, he's gonna look good. If he can get top position, he can get good ground and pound, but not really impressed with a lot of parts of his game. With his defensive grappling, I think he could get taken down and exposed on the mat. And then with a really technical striker, I think he's gonna struggle because he's just a little bit wild, but definitely has power.
Fair enough. All right, moving on down, we have another guy named Chris Duncan. This time his name is just Chris Duncan. Give me some insight into him against Omar Morales.
Yeah, we got a whole like Bruno Silva situation going on here with all these Chris Duncans. But so yeah, 29-year-old, 9-1, 8 finishes, Scottish striker, making his UFC debut following a first round knockout on the Contender Series, where he almost got knocked out himself, and that was actually his second time going on Contender Series and get knocked out the first time. So he has looked super prone to getting knocked down and knocked out, but I mean, he handled adversity well in his last fight. He looked like he was out on his feet, and then somehow lands a big punch, knocks the other guy out. I mean, kind of a miracle comeback on that one, but I would say still a bad look because you don't want to just get badly hurt in all of your fights. In between those 2 Contender Series fights, he actually moved up to 170 and fought to a decision, but basically all of his other fights are ending in knockouts down at 155. So just a straight up brawler, man. He's a like die on the sword, either knockout or get knocked out type of guy, and gonna have the home crowd behind him because he's from the UK.
All right, and then I think that's it. Yeah, that's it, right? That's all we have for newcomers on the slate. Just that's it, only 6 or 7. So let's play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Just really quickly, fighters that have less than 5 fights under their belt. Fighters that maybe haven't fought in a few years, just to give some context to their fight logs and their UFC stats. So, Jake, once again, we will start at the very top. The very first fight of the night, Juliana Miller and Veronica Hardy. Miller has just one UFC fight and not that many professional fights, and Hardy hasn't fought since 2020. So, for both of these fighters, are they good or bad, and is this a good or bad matchup?
Yeah, I mean Miller can grapple, but overall she's still a bad fighter, just terrible striking defense. She only has 4 pro fights, man. Like we didn't get to see her striking defense exposed in her last fight because she was on the mat the whole time. So she's a bad fighter. I guess you could call it a good matchup because Hardy hasn't fought in 3 years and has a pretty poor takedown defense. But I would say an unknown matchup. We don't know who Hardy is right now because she hasn't fought in so long, and she was dealing with a bunch of concussions earlier in her career. She fought at 135, came down to 125, retired, came back, married Dan Hardy, trains in England now. I mean, just so many differences. I mean, I would say she's like one of the biggest unknowns on the card. She could look absolutely terrible, or she could look really good. I thought her striking actually looked decent earlier in her career. Taekwondo background. I mean, the biggest issue is takedown defense, but we saw her submit Polyana Viana with an armbar off her back, and I would say Polyana Viana is a lot better than Juliana Miller. So she's live for a submission. She's a better striker than Miller. So I think it's probably a good matchup for both of them. And I mean, it's hard to call either one a good fighter at this point, but I think it's definitely a good matchup on both sides.
I think the best way to say this, Jake, is that we all agree that the money line is probably too wide here. Certainly, some stabs warrant it for Hardy on the money line. However, that doesn't change Miller's ceiling because Miller could be the highest scorer on the slate. The model thinks so because of what this matchup presents.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, Miller could take her down, control her, and submit her. I mean, that is 100% possible. And if Hardy can keep it standing, she could land a ton of striking volume and absolutely murder Miller, or she could land an armbar off her back. So, I mean, both of them have high ceilings, and I think it's gonna be a fun fight to start the card. If it stays standing, I think we're gonna see like a crazy brawl.
Sneaky, sneaky fight to target with combined, what, 23%, 24% total ownership, right? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
target that fight. All right, moving on down, we have Jake Hadley as a big favorite here against Malcolm Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, another young guy. He's got a lot to work on. We saw him get smothered on the mat in his debut, which makes it hard to fully trust him. But I think he's pretty good. I mean, he's got a couple holes in his game. He always blocks strikes, like by putting his elbow up and leaving his liver exposed. And no one has kicked him in the liver yet, but someone is going to eventually. Um,
Will it be Malcolm
and
Gordon?
that's definitely a
Probably
hole in his
not.
game in striking. Probably not. Probably not, because Malcolm Gordon's terrible, except for he's a decent grappler, but terrible chin. Anytime you face Malcolm Gordon, it's a good matchup. And I guess I would call Jake Hadley a decent fighter. I mean, I think he landed a ton of volume in his last fight. He can grapple, he can strike a little bit. I think he's decent. He's still a young guy improving. He's not like great, but I might call him good and a good matchup.
All right, Patrick has a question. What's with Nelson's ownership being on the lower end? I think, Jake, that can easily be explained by looking at his fight logs and not really scoring that well. However, just briefly, you and I both agree that his ownership probably doesn't represent his upside in this matchup against Barberena.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just recency bias. It's price, the what you can get around him. I mean, you pull up his DraftKings scores. I mean, the guy hasn't scored over 100 points since 2016, and he's priced at 9,200. So I mean, his lower volume, he's got kind of that karate style, like not much striking volume. So he's super reliant on landing a well-timed submission, which I totally think he's going to do. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a box score watcher. He's the odd man left out at that price point.
For sure. All right, moving on down. We already talked about Makai really quickly. I think we both think he's good. Is this a good matchup for him to score well, though?
Man, that's tough to say. Vialo has fought like twice in the last 4 years. I mean, it's really hard to know what we're going to get from him. So, I mean, that's another guy that's a real wild card. I mean, ideally for Makai, if he would get someone that can't grapple very, very well,
True.
and Vialo can grapple, so it's definitely not the best matchup. Honestly, I don't know exactly how decent Fialo's defensive grappling is going to be in this matchup, so I hesitate to say it's good or bad. But it's not great, and it's sort of a mystery. And Mikhaev could be injured, so he's good, but maybe injured, and in kind of a mystery matchup.
Fair enough. All right, moving on down. I think we're almost there, right? Yeah, we hit everybody, right? Everybody who has less than 4 fights.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, we got them all. All right, 5 fights left. Let's rapid fire here. We'll give a fight that you have to target in DFS. We'll give you our favorite prize picks play and our stream parlay of the week. 5 minutes left to get any final questions in about UFC 286. Reminder, as you're watching, if you're not subscribed already to the channel, make sure you are subscribed to get notified when we go live, upload these videos, and give us a thumbs up. We appreciate that. For more content, check out MMADFS.com, Jake's site, where he writes up every single fight from a betting and DFS perspective. Also has premium content. Check out our Occupy model, ranks every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings with projected ownership. Make sure you check it out. All the links are in the description below. So, Jake, fight that you have to target. We already said the sneaky one. It's Miller versus Hardy. Is there another fight that you're looking at that whoever wins likely scores very well in DFS?
Yeah, man, there are a few on the slate. I couldn't even include them all in the plug, but I like the Shore Americani fight. I think Americani is a round one sub or bust. If he gets it at his cheap price tag, it's gonna be hard to get left out. And if he doesn't, I mean, we saw it in his last fight. We see it all the time. The guy gasses out, and Jack Shore is a late round finisher. I mean, that's what he does. I know Shore is moving up a weight class, which adds some uncertainty. But if this fight gets out of the first round past like the 7 minute mark, I think Americani gasses, and I think when you get a guy that gasses out and you're already a late finisher, I think it's the perfect storm to just put up a huge score because you can either get the finish or you can land just an insane amount of volume and then get the finish. I think it sets up well for sure.
Junior in the chat says, "Who's your favorite cheap fighter that could finish someone inside the distance?" So Jake, let's think under. Let's go under 76. Let's go under 7,500. Well, let's go underdogs. Underdogs that you think has the best chance of submitting. That's cheap. That's your favorite. That you have a lot of exposure to.
Yeah, I think Dushko, man. I think he's a kill or get killed type of guy. I think he's either going to get knocked out early or he's going to get the fight to the ground and land 100 ground strikes and get another ground and pound finish in the first 2 rounds. So I mean, you got to love his upside.
As evidenced by his 106, 119, 120 versus 9, 19, 19 DK scores. So I agree. I like Ajmus too. We'll talk about him here in another second. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Dorovich is the easy answer there, right? The field, Jake, is going to gravitate towards Gaethje and Fiziev. We haven't talked about that yet. 3 minutes left, just 15 to 30 seconds. We both agree that at least the Gaethje side is over-owned by the field, but how do you expect this fight to play out with Fiziev?
Yeah, man, I could see it going 2 different ways. I could see both guys' durability holding up and it ending similar to the Chandler fight, where it's just a wild brawl, but it's all striking, so it's hard for either guy to really score well without a finish. Or I could see Gaethje potentially having gone off a cliff.
Yeah.
He looked bad on the scales. He got knocked down by Oliveira. Like, it wouldn't be shocking if Fiziev just knocked Gaethje out. I would be much more surprised if Gaethje came out and just starched Fiziev. So I think Gaethje is going to be over-owned because I think, his lone path is like winning a super high volume decision. I mean, I'm not saying he can't get a knockout, but I think it's less likely than his ownership would tell you.
And Fiziev just generally is pretty good defensively, so tough to score well against. So Randy Scores in the chat making his court mandated appearance says, "What's up, guys? Who's your favorite low-owned fighter under 15%? 10 fighters under 15%. So Jake, favorite under 10% or under 15% fighter this week?"
Oh man, I might have to get real gross here and go all the way to the bottom and say Veronica Hardy, man. I think at 4% owned, I think that she's got the potential to come out on the first fight of the card and just flip this slate upside down.
I mean, you have to like 4%. Any fighter at 4%, you have to like, especially against a fighter who has 5 professional fights. Yeah, I agree with you on Hardy as it being a fantastic tournament play. The other one that I like, I mean, there's no other way that this fight ends besides Ashmu's getting some volume, getting some takedowns, and then getting submitted by a guillotine or like some other choke, right? So I think he's the other guy that makes a lot of sense to me. But one fighter that we haven't talked about that's going really overlooked, Jake, and it makes sense just because of her recent fights, is Joanne Wood, who I know you mentioned in your write-ups has a high ceiling, but is just 15% owned.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't want to completely light money on fire on the first fight, then I would 100% say Joanne Wood. I love Wood to get a high volume decision here. She has been in some absolutely terrible matchups lately. She's been submitted basically every time. She fought Grasso with a torn quad. I mean, she's just honestly, I thought she retired after that fight.
Yeah.
Maybe she's retiring after this one, but I think she said she has 2 fights left on her contract. She's from Scotland. I'm sure she wanted to come back and fight in front of the UK crowd, man. I love her to put up a high volume decision. She almost always scores well. I get it. She's 37. She's like 1-4 in her last 5 fights. But man, her upside's there. Her floor is there. I don't see Carolina finishing her unless like Wood like trips into a guillotine Like, I think this is a great spot for Wood. Absolutely love her.
All right, final minute of the show. Any final questions? It's probably too late. Sorry. Join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. We have 3 hours, 2.5 hours till the fight starts. So, Jake, favorite prize picks play. You see the promo code on screen. Promo code Occupy. Get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Parlay a bunch of props together. They usually have some soft UFC lines. Favorite one, real quick, Jake.
Yeah, I like Wood. It was over 63 and a half significant strikes to start the week. It's gone up to 70 and a half because everyone knows it's a great line because she's going to land 100 significant strikes. It doesn't matter how much they push it up when the opener is that bad. It could go up to 80 and she's going to hit the over. I mean, I love that prize picks play. It's like last week with the Carl Williams takedowns where they set it at 1.5 originally, then 2, then 2.5. It doesn't matter. It was a terrible opener. It should have been set at like 4 or 5. So similar situation here. Love it.
All right, stream parlay of the week. I already talked about how he's going to get submitted, but I like his money line. I think it's too wide. Yanel Ashmouz, money line for me. Jake, who are you pairing that with?
Yeah, I mean, just, continuing this late trend of Wood by decision plus 100. I get it. Her money line's like negative 175. I don't see a finish, man. I don't want to lose any value. I'm betting Wood decision at plus 100. If we pair those together, it's plus 580 on the parlay.
Plus 580. Final thought from Dante in the chat. It says, quick strategy for a single bullet in the 555. I always support you, Brian, since you're from PG County as well. PG County in the house represent on an MMA Saturday. What's up, Dante? Appreciate you tuning in, and thank you for the support. Jake, single bullet in a small field contest. My advice would be you still have to take on some risk, but don't be too risky. Play 1 to 2 sub 20% fighters. Don't be afraid to fade at least one big favorite. Anything else, Jake, that I missed?
Yeah, I would say you could probably limit it to 2 dogs in that type of contest. You probably don't need to get risky enough to play 3. We got a lot of good 8K options, so you don't have to go a stars and scrubs approach.
Yeah, that's a good point. Probably 4 favorites, 2 dogs, probably the most optimal build for that type of contest. So thanks again for tuning in. Thanks to everyone for listening. Big show, big event. Starts at 1 o'clock here. If you're a March Madness fan, that starts here in an hour and a half. So it is quite the sports day. So for Jake at MMADFS.com, I'm Brian Jester from Occupy Fantasy. Thank you for listening, and good luck at UFC 286.